We went through a church planners course, and I remember being asked if there's anything else that you care about doing, or something that you have a passion to do, go do that. Really go pursue that, go do that, because it's going to be easier than what you think this is going to be.
Welcome to Church Planting 101. We are your hosts, Drew and Megan Land. In this course, 10 church planters from 6 different continents and 6 different church movements are going to give you 101 thoughts and strategies on church planting. Now, there are 10 episodes of 30 minutes each, with some activities at the end of each episode. So make sure that you have downloaded the PDF that accompanies this course for the notes and the activities. We recorded these interviews during the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020. So we had to do everything over Zoom. And every once in a while, the internet glitches on us. But don't let it throw you. The material is rich with wisdom, and it is for anyone interested in church planting.
So most people think that church planting can be beyond them. But what I love about this course is that you're going to meet very, very ordinary people from all over the world that are just like you, that are just like me, who simply answered the call of God and trusted God along the way. So our aim is to prepare you to church plant by looking at their lives, but also to inspire you to catch God's heart for the nations and his love for the lost in such a way that you'll be stirred into faith and action. And to get started, we thought we would give you the best and the worst of our interviewees' church planting experiences, because we want to be real. And in episode 1, they're going to speak about what they feel they did well. And in episode 2, they'll speak about what they wish they had done differently.
At the beginning of each episode, what we're going to do is introduce you to one church planter at a time in turn. So we start with Jody and Vanessa Romero from Los Angeles, California. They're a part of the New Covenant Ministries International movement, also known as NCMI. And what I appreciate about them so much is their raw honesty and their vulnerability that really comes through all that they share. So thanks for being a part of this church planting course, and I hope you enjoy this first episode.
We're Jody and Vanessa Romero. We are leading a church in Los Angeles, California called Restoration LA. It's properly in East LA. Yeah, we planted out of Turning Point Church in 2009 and then launched the church in East LA in 2010. And we've been going 10 years now, so it's been a great journey, highs and lows. But obviously, man, God's been so good to us in this season. He's added, He's grown His church, and we have just kind of been determined to remain faithful and watch Him build a church and us love people and disciple people and reach people. I think that's been our pattern. So His goodness and our trying to be faithful, and it's worked out well for us. So.
Right. Yes.
To begin to answer that question, it's important to say, at least in our circumstances, we did far more not well than we did well. So that just true. We should put that out there. I think there are some things that we did do well, but there's a ton that we didn't do well. Mm-hmm. And honestly, by God's grace, we're still here. Yeah. So that's huge. That's important to remember.
One of the things we did really well was we were absolutely convinced, and we had real faith to plant. We just knew God had spoken to us, and it wasn't to transfer growth from other churches. We really were pioneering a specific type of church, and we felt very convicted in that.
I think we have two things that we think we did well. Number one is we heard God.
Yeah.
I think that's extremely important. You know, I hear a lot of people I speak to have the opportunity to minister outside of our own context, and I hear a lot of people say we think we're called to plant, or we're thinking of, and there's and I understand that, because it's a big thing. It's no small thing to plant a church, and but I think hearing God is paramount, and I think that was one of our anchors, is knowing that we heard God, and hearing God is an absolute. If you haven't heard, if there's church cultural pressure to plant, or if you're just thinking, it could be extremely hard, because you're going to need to lean back on what you heard.
So I think in both instances, in planting a church from Harare in Zimbabwe, Harare to Bulawayo, and then from Bulawayo to come to Nairobi, I think seeking God, I think we definitely did that well. I think there was just a sense of this is bigger than we can handle. And so, almost a sense of desperation and seeking God and wanting to hear what He thought about it all and what He was leading us into and directing us into. So that was definitely a big thing.
Yeah, and part of what that seeking God looked like, prayer, some fasting as well, and lots of godly counsel, which were all invaluable in the process.
Yeah.
In the lead up to the church plant, about 6 months prior to the launch, we gathered weekly for prayer meetings. And that had several benefits. The first was building relationally with the core team of about 6 or 7. The second was that the sense of ownership grew as God spoke to us, not just to me, but spoke to us corporately. And so there was a real sense of conviction and ownership that grew amongst the team, that God had called us to do something, and that they were actually shaping it themselves. They were part of that shaping process. So that was very important.
And very intentionally kind of doing the next thing God told us to do.
Yeah, I think a huge deal for me was I wanted my wife and kids, who at the time we had 3 kids under 4, to love Jesus more because of planting a church rather than resent it all. And so we were just really careful to not burn out too quickly, to sort of take our time, to have some good boundaries, to prioritize our kids. And it's brilliant now as we speak to them about their church planting experience and what it's like to be pastors' kids. And they love the fact that I'm their dad and their pastor, and they love the church. And that was just such a big deal for me.
And I think the other thing that Teresa and I did well, we took our family with us. So we involved our kids in the process. So our kids were young, but we journeyed with them with the thought, first of all, of leaving, the responsibility of what that looked like, the call that we felt on our lives. We prayed with them. There was a sense of excitement and ownership in them as well. And that was important to us.
I think you've completely failed if you build a church and blow up your family. And I think Scripture's just really clear. If a church planter can't provide for the needs of his family, 1 Timothy tells us that we're worse than an unbeliever and have denied our faith. So it's a big deal to God. And so I think that was, looking back, that was a sort of big priority, that we thrived in the middle of quite a chaotic experience of planting a church.
Next one was just prepare your marriage and family.
Absolutely.
We have this thing, even now, we have kids in their 20s, and we have children, our youngest is a year.
Yeah.
And we invite all of them, regardless of their ages, into family meetings. And so we'll say in the beginning stages, we feel God saying this.
Yeah.
And then allow the Lord to just individually massage these truths, or maybe a vision that God has given Jody, into their hearts and their minds, so that we don't miss that. We don't want to be parents that just make decisions and say, well, we made a decision, come along. I know there's some things that we do, we have to do that, right? With children, we don't always give them everything, but what we learned and we thought we did really well was just bringing our kids along, sitting them down, and talking to them about what God has been saying to us. And it does teach them how to hear God themselves and how, what the processes of obedience when you hear God and then you see the steps taking place to obey the Lord. And I think we have to prepare our marriage. We have to prepare our family. If the husband is ready to plant and the wife isn't, to me, that's a warning sign.
Yeah,
that's a warning sign. I think we have to be on the same page as a family and as a married couple.
Starting with few people, not with many. So I called about 12 people at the beginning. I presented the program, and among those 12, 7 said yes, we want to go and plant this church with you guys. And then we didn't start organizing Sunday services, but we begin by establishing small groups at the beginning. So we didn't want to plant a Sunday service. We start by desiring to plant small groups at the beginning.
Building relationship with the core team in the lead up before the pressure comes to actually establish strong relationships. And so we did that through the prayer meetings, but also through sharing meals and just generally doing life together. It also gave me the opportunity to assess who God had given me on the team in terms of their gifts, their passions, their talents, which I was able to draw on in the period leading up to the launch. But more importantly, as we got going, I had a far better read on who would be best positioned to do what. So that was very helpful.
Yeah. I think a second thing that we are happy that we did is that we invested a lot relationally into the core team. Mm-hmm. Lots of time together, lots of meals, lots of getting to know each other. The team here on the ground we didn't know well before landing here in Nairobi. Mm-hmm. And that core team has become half of our fellow eldership. And we're thankful for that. And it's an investment that is bearing fruit still.
Команды служения, что действительно не один насаждал, а что это команда.
We also had teams, so this wasn't only what we've been doing good. It's not just sending one person, but the team. So a team is going to another place.
И что,
and, this is what we think is really good.
I think as well, looking back, because I led a church before planting, had a fairly good idea of what it is that we wanted to plant. And we knew we actually wanted to reach everyone in our city with the gospel, but we knew our passions were particularly students and the underprivileged, the poor. And little work was happening in the city with those people groups. And so we made the church about reaching them, and we knew in time we'd reach others, but we did the hard work of contextualizing, specializing in trying to reach them, and that was a fruitful strategy.
Is what I found doing well is that 3 areas. Number 1 is that I should know what is my gift. So, and second thing is what is my my skill area, and the context and the culture of the people. So if these 3 factors, I should know what is my skill, my giftings, and then I should know the context and the culture. So when these 3 factors come together, is what I feel it is.
So give me an example of like someone's gift and how it might, and if they understood the culture. Can you give us a real example there?
So as I said, that the church planter, when he's about to start, he should know his gifting, so that the areas that he does not have, he can develop that later. For example, I can be a good evangelist, but I also need to develop the skill of being a pastor. I also need to develop the heart of being a leader. So, but you should know who you are first, and then later what is required for the field, you start developing on the process, which God does it in His mercy, that you, on the journey, you learn that. So we don't begin as pastors. We don't begin as, the top leaders. We all begin as an evangelist, as Paul said, do the work of an evangelist to Timothy. And the second thing that the church planter needs to understand is the context and the culture. This is where it plays a very important role, is that I may be a person from city, and I will be very context and culturally relevant to my city. And if I try to plant a church in a village, I will be totally out of the context, out of the culture, and it will backfire. I will get into a lot of own failures and then realize what I did. So context and the culture is very important on churches being planted. That is one thing I see that, like for example, Paul, I think he picks up Timothy before he's going down to meet certain people. He says, let's circumcise, because that is very important, to connect the person to the context and the culture there.
I think we very intentionally positioned ourselves as learners, not coming with a preconceived notion of what even church was going to look like. We had committed ourselves to learning about the culture, learning about what church in America in general and in Chicago in particular looked like.
And then the third thing I think we did well, I guess that I as the leader did well, was clearly defining the vision. Speaking and giving clarity into the kind of church that we were looking to build. And in particular, in our context in South Africa, it was a multi-racial and multicultural church that had a distinctly South African flavor. And that was particularly important for us because a good number of the team were actually Zimbabwean. And so we could quite easily have become a Zimbabwean flavored church, but just getting it into the guys that we are missionaries that God has put in South Africa for a reason. And so getting that into the DNA of the church early was critically important, and one of the things I think I did well at the beginning.
We held our plans pretty loosely. So I would say one of the areas that we weren't strong at was in developing the whole plan for church planting in the first place. Mm-hmm. So that may be part of the reason why it was easy to let go when certain things changed, when circumstances changed, when it seemed like God was up to something new. So for those of you who feel like you've got a great plan and it's solid, I would also suggest hold that plan loosely, because God does different things. And of course you probably know this, God does different things in different moments and different seasons. And it was something that I think through the years that we were able to do and kind of adjust to what God was doing in the moment, instead of holding to a specific plan and feeling like we needed to work that over and over. For us, it was really important to hold those plans loosely and to adjust course when we sensed that God was moving in new or different directions.
Yeah, that is the thing with even with these sort of interviews, is that I will probably try and tell you some of my best stories, and it's often with hindsight that you see things most clearly. And so I think I would encourage prospective church planters to not worry too much if they've not got it all figured out really, really clearly. I think you do need a plan, but it's often in the retelling of the stories that you can look far more gifted and able than you actually are in the moment.
We laid foundations in the initial 12 months here. We didn't rush into Sunday meetings, but a phrase that we used and found helpful was often with a church plant, you start on with a blank page, and that's not good enough. You also want to get onto the same page. And we spent some months doing that, which was a real blessing to us. And even before landing here in Nairobi, God gave us three words, three kind of guiding words, which were grace, pace, and space, and to trust that this was going to be a work of God's grace, to think about the pacing of our lives, which is a special consideration for us, being bivocational. And then just in terms of space, trusting God to bring us into a spacious place and to give us a lane to run in this city and in this nation, which He's done faithfully.
The main thing was to make sure that the gospel was at the center of everything that we wanted to do, in terms of putting the good news of the gospel at the center, in terms of our relationship with God, the relationship that we were going to have between each other, the relationship, the atmosphere among us, and also the way we were connecting to others. So the good news of Jesus, the salvation by grace alone, and not only salvation by grace, but sanctification also by the same gospel that saves us. So that was at the core at the beginning, and that I think it created a philosophy of ministry, a way of doing things that we really appreciated at the beginning.
We really welcomed people very well. When people would say, you know, on the comment cards, like there was one question early on about like, you know, what did you like about the service or about your experience with us? And almost everybody said, I felt really welcomed. And as we've been around churches for a long time, that's not always the case. So I feel really thankful that people, when they came in, they were talked to by not just like the greeter, but like by other people too, not just by staff, but by the people sitting, you know, next to them. So people really felt seen and heard and welcomed in that way. And I think with that, we created, I think, a pretty good like family sort of culture atmosphere where people could heal and grow and experience the power and the love of Jesus.
Ну, я думаю, что, как я говорил, что вот ДНК, что мы всегда строили хорошие отношения.
Yes, first of all, I think that our DNA is just we've been always building good relationship.
И я говорю, что мы вместе молились.
We had good time of praying together.
Ободряли друг друга,
and also encouraging
служить другим людям.
To serve other people.
I did drop a couple things into our hearts, especially building community and family, which probably sounds like an obvious thing to do, but we found out later just how significant that was.
And secondly, and then Vanessa can chime in on this, is we obey. You know, I think I know a lot of people I've talked to over the years and say, hey, we feel we're called to plant, or God's called us to plant, and just haven't done anything with that. and so obeying, I mean, there's a lot to be said in the going. You know, going is a huge part of the obedience. And you know, so normally when people ask, hey, we're called to plant, and you know, I ask, so when are you leaving? Because I think that's a huge part of you know, we're not trying to, like our kids, we're not trying to push them out the door, or maybe some of us are, but it's absolutely, you know, something in the going.
Yeah, it kind of relieves the stress of our own thinking. I think when God speaks, it's kind of like, if you don't listen to him, then you know you're in disobedience. And I never want to be in that position. And so I think for us, it came to the place of hearing God, and then he just began to unravel or kind of like unveil what was coming. And he began to prepare our hearts and our minds. And so we just have to be obedient. I think we need to hear God and obey God. Yeah. And I felt the question for me was, if I don't do this, then what is the outcome of that? And I just could not imagine myself being in disobedience. I didn't want that with my dad, with my father.
I think one thing that we did do well, because we're still here, is like we persevered. We actually made it. I wanted to personally throw in the towel probably 3 or 4 times, you know, in the last 14 years or so. And God was like, I haven't released you, you know? And so like, all right, we're still here. So I would say, you know, we found ways to make it and persevere. And we'll get into some of those answers a little later of how we did that more specifically. But yeah, through losses of people leaving, and through, you know, financial difficulties and parenting difficulties, we're still here. So we're very thankful. And that is by God's grace, for sure.
If we can encourage you in anything in your church planting journey, it's really simple when you think about it, but you're going to need to love Jesus first in everything. Like, love Jesus first in all of your decisions and in all of your ways. Love him first. It's the greatest of commandments, and it doesn't get wiped away when it comes to church planting. Love Jesus first in your church plant. Make sure he's glorified. Make sure he's honored. Make sure he is the centerpiece of all that you're doing. And next would be, man, love people. Love people. I know when we think about church planting, we think about leading people, and yes, we lead, but it has to be from a place of love. And so just know that we're called to love people and love the people that God sends you. And listen, God's going to send you the Peters who are ready to cut off people's ears. You know, God's going to send you the doubting Thomases. God's going to send you Judases. And we have to know that we're still called to love. We're called to love those people.
We've kept each episode intentionally short to make room for group discussions around each of the topics. Now, most of you will be watching this course in a group, but take a moment now to multiply into smaller groups of 3 or 4, and you're going to keep husbands and wives together in those groups. Now, from the list of the top 10 things that church planters did well, which of the 3 do you think would be most valuable? So choose your top 3, then explain those answers to the rest of the group.
We'll see you in episode 2 as our church planners get real with their mistakes and what they would do differently.